So today I'm going to talk about forgiveness. And I was going to say the path to freedom. And I'm going to change it and say it's our path to freedom. And I want to go into this idea of forgiveness because I don't believe that we ever need to forgive. And you've read, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of books out there saying you got to forgive, you got to forgive. Here's the process, you got to forgive, you got to forgive. I'm going to tell you, if you focus on the idea of forgiveness in that sense, you're focusing on the idea that there's two. There's a you and there's a them. And the second we go into this idea of you versus them, we create duality. And when we create duality, we come out of the idea of oneness. So I'm going to take you right back to the start. Every week at Agape, here's what we talk about. There is one. It is infinite, it is all-knowing, it is all love, it is all joy, it has always been, it will always be. It is what we call God, it is universal mind, it is divine intelligence, it is perfect expression. It lives with itself, as itself, infinitely displaying, creating out of itself in infinite ways, and is in harmony with everything that is its creation, because its creation is it expressing. Because the divine can only take thoughts that it thinks and out of itself, out of the nothingness which it is the seen and it is the unseen. It takes the unseen and from that it creates an expression of itself. The only purpose the divine, the infinite has is to create and to experience more. So if that is the intention, if that is the truth about the divine, then is that not our truth? Because there's nothing we can be other than an individualization of that divine energy. So we've got to get rid of this story that there's a God out there and we're here to serve that God. We've got to get out of the story that there's a God out there that is judging. That is the greatest story we've ever been told, and it just doesn't exist. Because you think about God, would God punish itself? Absolutely not. But as God, there is a law. There's a law that we call the law of cause and effect. That law of cause and effect simply means as you do, it will be done unto you. With a cause, there is a natural effect. It's not like it's a punishment. It's not that someone's giving anything to you, positive or negative. It's automatic. So in that sense, God never judges itself because there's always a law of cause and effect working. And the beauty of it is when we can realize that, when we can accept that, we realize if we have put a cause into motion and there's an effect, we can change the new cause. We can create a new cause through our thought. You see, this idea of forgiveness, I go back to the idea of the saying that you hear a lot. Let go and let God. But I ponder that as well. So I've broken it down into this aspect. When I use the idea of letting go, I release the idea that the past or any person has any power over me. You hear what I'm saying? When I'm saying let go, I'm letting go of the past or any person, any event that I think has power over me. That could be your mother, your father, your brother, your sister, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your husband, your wife, strangers. They have no power over you. And when you let go of that, you now tap into your creative power. And when you've let go of the past no longer is occupying your mind. And when it's not occupying your mind, you're free to create anew. You see how that works? By letting go of the past, I clean the slate of creation, and I'm able to now take my new thought, plant it firmly in my mind with belief and conviction, and I create anew. Jesus said it so simply. He said, it is done unto you as you believe. So if you believe in hell and damnation, let me tell you, you're going to get hell and damnation. If you believe that to become spiritually awakened, there has to be a dark night of the soul, guess what? There's going to be a dark night of the soul in your life. The question I would ask, what do you choose? Can you choose to go through life without that, to experience the joy, the bliss of God, always becoming more of itself as you? Or do you want to go through having all this contrast and experiencing it? It's a personal choice, and each of us gets to make it. I want to say that when we let go and we let God, the now, because that's where we're at, equals our power. When we are in the now, we are all powerful, because in the now there is no past. There is no future. There's just right now. And so the infinite mind of God that we are. So remember, if there's only one, that means there's one mind. And the individualization of that mind that we are is using that very all mind in everything we do. And as it's using it, there's nothing we can't create. People have asked spiritual leaders, could we recreate an arm if we lost an arm? Do we believe it's possible? Do we believe it's possible? Because in the infinite, all things are possible. The question is, how deep is your belief? I asked the question last night, do I believe I can grow hair on the top of my head? And I realized I have not put much energy into that idea. I have not put the spiritual coin there. Apparently, in my mind, when I glance in a mirror and there's a mirror behind me and I see this beautiful glowing spot, I realize that in a prior life I must have been a monk. And so I'm just going to honor my prior life and allow it to be that wisdom within me. I'm not going to give it my spiritual coin. But there are other things in my life that I am giving that spiritual coin. I'm giving that as far as how do I express myself as a connection in oneness. My greatest desire and the belief I'm building is, how can I demonstrate what pure love is in all situations with all people? Because I want to tell you that forgiveness is unconditional. It is not in this event or that event. It means it's always with every person and with everything. Take a deep breath. Because there's probably some people in your life that you are holding something on. And you're saying, I'll be damned if I forgive them. Say that in your mind. And how does your heart feel? Doesn't feel all that good. It feels a bit heavy. So you know what this idea of being unforgiving or not being in the moment is? It's about willing to take poison and drink it fully down and believe that the other person will suffer. So when we are in a state of holding on to all of these items from our past, we are literally drinking the poison. We are taking ourselves down. And what happens is, are we being self-loving? And isn't that the most important thing that comes down to all that we're doing is, how do I self-love more? And the idea of self-love is to be in the present, to be in the now. As I explored this idea of being in the now, I came to this realization, is that if we are in a state of unforgiveness, of allowing that past to hold us away from the pure connection of God that we are, if we are in that state, we cannot have a demonstration of prayer. You hearing that? You can pray all you want, but when you're holding on to that past, what is that saying? It's saying, I'm not one with God. There's something outside of me. And do we not talk about that? When we go and talk about affirmative prayer or spiritual mind treatment, as we call it in religious science, we go into a state that there's only one, and I am one with it. And it's from that connection, that realization of truth that we are one with all that exists, that the power of demonstration happens. So if we are in a state of unforgiveness, that we're holding on to the past, there's no way that we can demonstrate our prayer because we don't believe we're one with God. We believe it would be like I believe in the little Lee instead of the all Lee. Does that make sense? So the more we can let go of what our husband did, our wife did, or this person in high school, or this person in grade school, or an ex-spouse, or a parent did, or another child did, or anyone did, we free ourselves and we give ourselves unconditional love. So let's look at unconditional love. And this is the definition I use all the time here at Agape. Unconditional love is to, without judgment, care for another's happiness and expect nothing in return. Hear that really clearly. Without judgment, care for another's happiness and expect nothing in return. Now, can you, without judgment, care about your happiness and expect nothing in return? Can you truly love yourself enough to not judge yourself? The second we go into non-judgment, we never have to forgive. Did you hear that? When we go to a state of non-judgment, we never, ever have to forgive. Because when you're non-judging, there's nothing to forgive. We have created a story that we have to be a certain way to feel love. Did you ever hear that? When you were raised as a kid, okay, Lee, if you do this, you're going to be a good boy, and I would take it. That's how mom and dad are going to love me, so I would try to please them. Then when I became a teenager, I did just the opposite of what they said. But it was always conditional. Anytime there's conditions, we have to enter into this idea that psychiatrists and spiritual people talk about forgiveness. But if we can go into a state of non-judgment, there is no condition. So here's the question I want to ask. So what's your story? Everybody here has got a lot of stories, don't you? I can tell you some stories. I was out last night with a couple, and I was telling some stories. But they were stories that didn't have an emotional attachment to it. You see, when you can tell a story about your life and not be attached to it, you know you've let go. So let's look at this idea of how do we live in the now with all the past that we've had up to this point? How do we let go of that past? Or how do we forgive? I would say the first thing that we must do is we must have a willingness. We must have a clarity within our mind that we desire to live in the now. And so if you are willing, that is the most important thing. After that, we make a decision. I will no longer live in the past. I will do everything I can so that I stay centered in the moment. I will release any attachment. I release any emotions. Okay, that's pretty easy, right? Everybody here willing? Everyone's willing. Everyone could make a decision. How many people want to let go? Everybody raise your hand. I want to let go of the past. Let me take it to this step. What did Jesus say about forgiveness? How often do we forgive? 70 times 7. In other words, it's every moment of every day we're releasing the past to be in the now. We've got to do that. So we've gone to the idea that we must have a willingness and we must make a decision. And here's the final step. We have to be willing to see whatever's happened in our lives from a different perspective. We have to take ourselves out of the story, out of the emotional drama, out of the emotional hurt that we've created by the perception of the event that happened that only we can do. And so we've got to come back and we've got to be able to look at this event and say, what good came of this event? That's a tough one. Because let's say something happened and we have 68 reasons why this really rips us off, why this is bad. Okay, there's 68 reasons. And if I were to go to someone and say, okay, tell me one thing of good that came out of it. Most people couldn't think of the one thing. But if you step back, all of a sudden things start happening. Oh, I got clarity. I got clarity into what I want to behave. Oh, I got clarity that I didn't know what this person's behavior really was about. I got clarity as to what was influencing them. It wasn't what I thought. I got clarity that I shouldn't be attached to what they do because what they did wasn't about me. That's the biggest thing. Whenever someone does something, it's never about you. It's always about them. They're doing it for themselves. No one ever does anything to you. They're always doing it for themselves. So when we ask a child to do something, it's not for their own good. It's for our good as a parent who wants to control, because control makes us think it's easier. But when we're controlling, we don't respect the right that that child, that adult, that partner, that parent is the individualization of God. We don't believe in oneness again. Do you see that? And the whole idea of life that I have found is, how do I come to oneness? How do I get back to the state of pure connection? And so when I sit down, and I've done this many times, when I've sat down and I've looked at what areas do I need to release in my life, I do take out a pen and paper and I make a list. And I write down all the garbage, everything that hurt, why I thought it sucked, what was done to me. I write it down. And then I pause and I go into a meditation where I quiet my mind. And I take myself out of it. I breathe. I go into my breath. And then I start making a list until I've made a list long enough that I can look at both lists and I no longer have an emotional charge. I can talk about the story that once would make me just churn inside, and now I have no thought about that. So I can remember, I'll share a story with you about my mother-in-law. God bless my mother-in-law. She's in the next dimension at this time, but it's a wonderful story. Because my mother-in-law made a lot of decisions in her life. And one of the decisions my mother-in-law made was she decided not to come to our wedding. And so for 5 years, we basically did not have interaction with my in-laws. And so it was, how do I get through that? I had to realize, didn't know any better. Was on alcohol, was an alcoholic. And so she was dealing it from a standpoint that I couldn't comprehend. I had no idea what it was like to be in her shoes. But one day, after we sort of made these amends, but every time I would see her, there'd be a knot in the stomach because you go back and you reflect on it. One day she was staying at our house, I forget for what reason, and she'd gone to bed and she came out. And my mother-in-law was a good-sized woman. And she must have been early 60s, I'm going to guess. And she came out with no wig, no teeth, and a muumuu. And my boys saw her, and they screamed. They absolutely screamed because it scared her. It scared them. But let me tell you, it scared me. Because I'm looking at her and I'm saying, will my wife look like this when she's 65? But I anchored that image, and it made me laugh. The next day, what did my mother-in-law do? We cooked up this magnificent flank steak. It was marinated. I barbecued it. This is for them. I was a vegan by this point, so I still cook and I feed people meat, so I'm not an extremist by any measure. And we did it, and we finished dinner, and you know how you have the cutting boards that are about this big, and around there'll be a groove, which is an edge all around, so nothing will leak off the cutting board, right? So we did this flank steak, and I'd taken the flank steak off after dinner. I put it in the foil wrap, and I gave the cutting board to my mother-in-law and said, take this and give it to the dog. She'll love the juice. Well, I handed it to my mother-in-law, and she looked at me with this look. And then she looked at the dog, and she took the platter and just poured the juice on the floor. And Jean and I just looked at her, couldn't believe our eyes. And the dog just went flopping in it, just licking and lapping. But and so when I think of my mother-in-law, I think of a muumuu, I think of no wig, no teeth, and I think her spilling this juice on the floor. How can you not love that woman? Do you see, when I say that, I have neutralized any feelings. That was my way of being able to neutralize it. And so the key thing, let's follow this story through. I had a willingness that I wanted to have peace in our family. I wanted to have love in our family. I made a decision that I would try my best. And then in my own way, I came up with my balancing act of how do I take the emotional charge out of this? This is something I do in spiritual counseling with people. There are people that have had some pretty, what we would term horrific things happen in their lives. And we will literally sit down for an hour or 2 hours, and we will go through it, and we will work on this list. And we'll work on it until that emotional charge is gone. Because once that charge is gone, we've now gone into the now. And when we've gone into the now, we are now powerful, and we can begin to create the life that we've always wanted. The thing about this is that only unconditional love can set us free. And unconditional love is to be able to first off and foremost look in the mirror without judgment and give yourself love and expect nothing back.